everyone. Okay. Good evening. Today's daf is daf mem beis. We are going to begin daf mem aleph amud sheni. On the last line over here, Rabbi Yossi Aimer. Before we get to Rabbi Yossi, I want to point out, very interesting, that it occurred to me after we hung up yesterday, is that we learned yesterday that if a person goes, the Anshe Yerushalayim used to carry their lulav all around the whole day, basically. But when they went into to learn Torah, since holding the lulav and esrog and learning Torah will disturb your concentration, so the Brisa said, "Mishage lulav biyad benoi." He would send his lulav home through his son, through his servant, through a messenger, and then he would begin learning. He wouldn't hold the lulav during that time. So I thought to myself, the Brisa doesn't say he goes home and drops his lulav at home, because probably it's teaching us that if he would get up and go home and drop his lulav at home, then he may not come back to the Beis Medrash. So therefore, once you're in the Beis Medrash, don't leave. Once you get into the zone of learning, whatever you can avoid doing, you avoid doing. If you can designate somebody else to do it, that's the basic idea. I told you once before that when the Reb Chofetz Chaim writes, the son wrote a biography. I said before that when he wrote the Mishnah Brura, his father did not interrupt the learning. The father did not interrupt the learning to daven mincha with a minyan, because he felt that if he loses his concentration, he may not be able to continue writing the Mishnah Brura. So I said that once before, and you see that in this idea. Okay, we're going to begin now the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yantiv. This is the famous Rabbi Yossi that we learned in the Mishnah, that if Yantiv Arishan of the Sukkos, and a person forgot and carried his lulav in the Rishus Harabim, so he forgot that it's Shabbos and started carrying the lulav to shul, so he's potter. Why? Because he's potter from a korban chatas, because he took it out, and what caused him to make a mistake was the fact that he was trying to do a mitzvah. So if you make a mistake on Shabbos trying to do a mitzvah, that's not a shogeg that you're going to be chayav a korban chatas. And Alan pointed out that this shita was we had a shita in Rabbi Lezer Demila Masechta Shabbos similar, but we're going to see Rabbi Yossi takes it one step further. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yantiv, Amar Abaya taught. Remember, he's on Amar Aleph, top of the page. Loi Shanu. When did Rabbi Yossi say that you're potter from a korban chatas? Elish lo yotzaboy. You didn't fulfill your obligation. You didn't fill your obligation at home. You actually, as soon as you started carrying into the street, you were on your way to fulfill the obligation. Aval yotzaboy. Once you were yotze at home, let's say you made the bracha at home, and you were yotze the mitzvah, so you're not busy anymore. You're not nervous about the mitzvah. So then, if you walked out with the lulav and esrog on Shabbos, then you're chayiv a korban chatas, right? That's what we learned. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? How is that possible to ever not be? How is it possible ever not to be yotze the mitzvah? As soon as you lift up the lulav and esrog at home to walk out your front door, you're already yotze the mitzvah. Because you yotze the mitzvah, the fact that all lulav and esrog require is to lift them up. So you already yotze the mitzvah. So how do you call this ta'a b'devar mitzvah? So Amar Abaya explained, when you turned over the lulav and esrog, the halacha is, let's say you turned over the lulav, and then you walked out with the lulav upside down. So you are not yotze the mitzvah, because in order to be mekayim a mitzvah, it has to be derech gedulai, the way it grows. We learned that oddly enough, we learned that idea from the Mishkan, because its Torah says atze shitim oimdim, that everything has to be in the normal manner that it grows. So if you turned around the esrog and walked outside, so you were not yotze the mitzvah, you're on your way to shul to be yotze the mitzvah. That's the case that Rabbi Yossi is talking about. Rava says, even if you did not turn it over. In our Mishnah, we're talking about you took it out on a plate, right? You took it out on a plate, let's say, carrying the lulav and esrog on a plate and walked outside. So then you're not chayiv and you're carrying it to shul, you're not chayav a korban chatas. So the Gemara says, what do you mean you carry this the lulav on a plate? For Rava Huda Amar, Rava said, even if you're carrying the lulav and esrog through a glove or something like that, that's considered taking. So perhaps when you carried it out, the lulav and esrog, you're mekayim the mitzvah, because Rava seems to imply and say that you don't necessarily have to hold a lulav and esrog. You just have to lift them up, and you can even be wearing a glove or wrapping the lulav and esrog in a towel and lifting it up, and you're mekayim the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Hani Mili, when was Rava giving you the leniency to carry the lulav through something else is derech kavod, if that's the honorable way to carry the lulav and esrog. If you wrap the lulav and esrog in a wrapping, and then you carry the lulav and esrog, okay, you can hear that you were yotzeh. Aval derech bizoyin, if it's not the normal way, a degrading way to carry the lulav and esrog, you put the lulav and esrog, as Rashi explained, on a plate, right? Then even Rava, you were not yotzeh the mitzvah. So back into the case, Rav Yossi says that if you're tored b'bar mitzvah, you're not chayav a korban chatas. What's the case talking about? A person walked out of his house with the lulav and esrog, either according to Baya upside down, so he was not yotzeh the mitzvah. He's on his way to shul to be yotzeh the mitzvah, or the way Rava gave the idea is that he was carrying it on a plate, and therefore he's not yotzeh the mitzvah as well. Tosfos points out, why don't you simply say he's on his way to shul to be mekayim the mitzvah, and therefore carrying it normally, he's not, his intention is to be mekayim the mitzvah when he gets to shul. So why can't we give that's the simple case? And the answer is that from here we see mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. In order to fulfill your obligation of a mitzvah, you don't necessarily have to have direct intention to fulfill the mitzvah. If a person, without thinking, walked out of his house with the lulav and esrog and thinking he's walking to shul, carrying it, he already fulfilled his obligation of lulav and esrog, because mitzvahs ain't on tzrichas kavana. So that's why the Gemara gave other ideas of how you're not being mekayim the mitzvah. Now, this is Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to say that one step further, Rabbi Yossi goes one step further about ta'ah b'davar mitzvah. Rabbi Yossi would say, oilus oif shnimsas bein agapayim. You found the oilus and oif in the Beis Hamikdash in a pile of birds. In other words, you know how the mizbeach looks. There's a ramp that goes up. Normally, the carbon oila, a bird oila, they would do the malika on the right side of that ramp. A carbon chatas, they would do it on the left side of the ramp, not to mix them up. So the din of an oila sa'oif, a bird that's an oila, you have to throw the whole thing onto the mizbeach and have it burnt. A chatas, the kahanim would eat. So what happens, but sometimes there was such an overload of people bringing birds, they actually brought the oila sa'oif on the side that they brought normally the chatas sa'oif. And that was when there was a back jam in the Beis Hamikdash, they would do it over, they would move an oilus and oif to the chatas oif side. So a kohen walks in, sees a bunch of birds on the floor there, thinking that this oilus oif is a chatas oif and he's supposed to eat it, right? So he's nervous that he's supposed to eat this chatas oif. Remember, a chatas was eaten by the kahanim in the Beis Hamikdash. So what did the kohen do? He took this oilus oif, which was supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach, he ba'achla, and ate it. Potter. So Rav Huna said that Rabbi Yossi would agree that you're potter. Why? Because you're ta'ah b'davar mitzvah. You wanted to do a mitzvah of eating a chatas. You made him eating a chatas. You ended up eating an oila. So you're potter from a korban me'ilah. In other words, normally when you violate something that belongs to hegdish, you have to bring a korban me'ilah. So here you're potter from that korban because because you were ta'ah b'davar mitzvah. So the Gemara says, "My kamashmala." What is Rabbi Huna teaching you about the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, the ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah potter, that he's teaching you that Rabbi Yossi says if you make a mistake doing a dvar mitzvah, you're potter from any carbon. Hanu hach, that is the same case of what we're talking about. Person brings out the lulav and esrog on Shabbos, he's potter from a carbon chatas. So what is Hegdish's case any different? So the Gemara says, Mahu the same. I would have thought with by the case of the lulav, Hassam over there, in our case of the lulav, who the tabedvar mitzvah, you made a mistake while doing a mitzvah, potter, because hainu the avad mitzvah, because eventually you're going to do the mitzvah. A person left his house with the lulav and esrog upside down, whatever, and therefore he's carrying in the Rosh Hashanah. Finally, when he reaches shul, he turns it over, and he eventually does the mitzvah. So therefore, in that case, you are potter from a carbon chatas. Aval hacha, but the case of the kachim, the Torah b'dvar mitzvah, loy avad mitzvah. You made a mistake in the dvar mitzvah, and you did not end up doing a mitzvah because eating a carbon oila that was supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach, you actually did not do a mitzvah. You did just only an avera. I might think not. That Rabbi Yossi extends his opinion even further. Not only is ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah, and God bless, you did the mitzvah, you're potter from a carbon, but even a ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah, what caused you to make a mistake was you were trying to do a mitzvah and you were time constrained because a kohen sees a chatas on the floor, he must eat it because he's thinking that there's only a day that you're supposed to eat the carbon chatas. So he's nervous that the time's going to go on. So he made a mistake trying to do a mitzvah. Turns out he ate a noila, so he didn't end up doing a mitzvah. Even so, Rabbi Yossi says you're potter, you're not liable because you were made a mistake. A mitzvah caused you to make a mistake. So the Gemara asks a question: what do you mean? Every mitzvah that causes you to make a mistake, is that a problem? Meisvei, we have a question. Rabbi Yossi says, "Hashoichet es a tamid she'ena mevuka kehilcha Shabbos." A carbon tamid was the sheep that was brought every day on the mizbeach, right? Carbon tamid. Now that carbon tamid had to be checked for any blemishes for 4 days. And if it's not checked for 4 days, that carbon tamid is not kosher. And therefore, you would have to bring another one. So what happened on Shabbos, a kohen shechted a carbon tamid, which is nice, but he wasn't checked according to the halacha of 4 days of checking. B'Shabbos, chayev chatas, he's obligated to be chatas. V'tzorech tamid acha, you have to bring another carbon tamid. So this is a question against Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah, even if you didn't end up doing a mitzvah, like in this case, you'd have to bring another carbon tamid. You just told me, ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah and loy aved mitzvah, still you're potter from a carbon chatas. So why over here in this case, you're chayev a carbon chatas? Amalei, so the answer to him, ba minei dehi. That's not a good case, except that case, because not every shlamazaliga thing that you do, because you're thinking mitzvah, is going to exempt you from a carbon chatas. Because in that case, you're a real shlemazel because you're very negligent. The Hitma law, we was taught to explain that opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rab Shmuel bar Chasai, Amar Rab Nun Sava, Amar Rab Yitzchak bar Ashin, Amar Rab Huna Marav. They all explain what Rabbi Yossi said was kegoin. Rabbi Yossi is talking about a case she'aviu melishka she'einu mevukarim. The person who brought the sheep to Shech brought it from the room or the office place in the Beis Hamikdash where it says these animals are not checked. So he went and took an animal that wasn't checked, and therefore that wasn't the mistake. So it was like more of a negligence, Rashi says, or it's very similar to he did something on purpose, and therefore that is not considered a ta'ah b'devar mitzvah. It's not a time constraint thing. He was not under pressure to do it. And so, therefore, this mistake is a complete, he wasn't conscious of what he was doing. And therefore, in that case, Rabbi Yossi will say, even though it's a mistake, and you might think it's a Torah Devar Mitzvah, in this case, you're chayev chatas, you're chayev carbon chatas. But if a time constraint causes you to make a mistake in a mitzvah, even though you don't make kind of mitzvah, normally Rabbi Yossi says you are potter from a carbon chatas. Let's go to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is Mikabelis. A nice Mishnah. Mikabelis, you come home from shul, a normal person would come home from shul at that time, in the time of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Mikabelis isha miyad beno miyad bala. A wife will come and take the lulav and esrog from the hands of her son and from the hands of her husband. I make a diak in the Mishnah that first she takes the lulav and esrog from her son, and then she helps her husband. And umachzirasei lamayim. And she takes the lulav and esrog and puts it near water. b'Shabbos and Shabbos. Now, what's the chiddush of this? Because you might think a lulav and esrog is muktzah for a woman because she's not mikayim a mitzvah with it. So the Mishnah teaches you that she could take the lulav, carry it, and return it into the vase of water, and return it into the water on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda explains, b'Shabbos machzirin. On Shabbos, you could return the lulav and esrog back into the water, into the vase that it was always there. Okay, now I'm pointing out that in the time of the Mishnah, there was no gezerah yet that you shouldn't take your lulav and esrog on Shabbos. So b'Shabbos machzirin, the woman would be allowed to take her husband's or son's lulav and esrog and put it back into the water on Shabbos. But Yom Tov, on Yom Tov moisifin, you're allowed to add water, okay, because it's a tircha to add water. On Shabbos, it's too much of a tircha, but Yom Tov, we permitted you to add the water. Ubamoyed, on Chalamoyed, machalifin, you're allowed to exchange the water to put in clean water into the vase. But that's the first part of the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah says, we know you have to be mechanech your son. So what age are you mechanech your child? So the Mishnah says, Koten hayadei l'naneya chaya b'lulav. If your small child knows the idea of how to shake a lulav, he's chayev in a lulav. Now, shaking a lulav is not, the most important part of the mitzvah. In fact, only the lifting up, it's an extra halacha l'maishem Sinai to shake the lulav. Nevertheless, in order to understand the chinuch of a child, he has to be advanced enough that knowing that the mitzvah is not only to lift the lulav and esrog, but to shake it at certain times in the hollow. So when he knows that, then his father is obligated him to make sure that he does the mitzvah of lulav. It doesn't say he has to buy him a lulav. And in my circles, they didn't buy the children a lulav, but he's obligated to make sure that his son fulfills the commandment of lulav and esrog. So the Gemara says, Pshita. Why is it? It's simple that a woman could take the lulav and esrog in her hand from her husband and son. So the Gemara says, Mahu, the same I would have thought, Hoyel ve'isha lav bar chiyuvihi. A woman has no obligation to do lulav and esrog. Ema loy tekabel. So I might think that it would be muktzah and she shouldn't even touch the lulav and esrog. So Kamash Mulam, the Gemara teaches you, that's what the Mishnah is teaching you, that here's the point, since for the husband, this is a useful item, and for the son, so therefore, if it's not muktzah for everybody, so therefore it's not muktzah for her either. So since for males, it's a useful item, the lulav and esrog, so even though a woman has no obligation, this is not a muktzah item to her. Now, what the Gemara could have easily answered is that a woman, if she wants, she could shake lulav and esrog and make a bracha. And the fact that the Gemara does not answer that, from this they prove that the Gemara holds that a woman, when she shakes lulav and esrog, should not make a bracha on netilas lulav, shaking sham and saisav b'tzivana. But I think most of the minhagi Yisrael is that if a woman does take lulav and esrog, she would make a bracha. Katan hadiyadeya lenanea. One of the katan that knows how to shake the lulav, his father has to make sure that he's mekayim the mitzvah of lulav. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught about other things regarding the mitzvah of chinuch, right? Katan hayadeya lananea. If a katan that knows how to shake a lulav, chaya b'lulav, his father is obligated to make sure he's mekayim the mitzvah of lulav. Lehis ateif, if he knows how to wrap himself in tzitzis, Chaya b'tzitzis, his father is obligated to use one of his own tzitzis. He doesn't have to buy him a pair of tzitzis, but make sure that he keeps the mitzvah of tzitzis or talis. Lishmar tefillin, if he knows how to keep the tefillin, make sure that he doesn't defile it in any which way, keep it clean and keep his body clean while he's wearing the tefillin. Here, Aviv, the father loikeach loy tefillin. Here, the father has to actually buy him the pair of tefillin. On the side of the Gemara, it points this out. It tzitzis, it doesn't say lakeach, because a person maybe has extra tzitzis at home. But a tefillin is not something that you have an extra pair of generally. So when your son is of the age that he knows how to lishmar tefillin, a father should buy him a pair of tefillin, start training him into tefillin. Everything is different today. Some people do it a few months before they put the tefillin, before the boy turns bar mitzvah, And some people, like myself, where I come from, only on the day of the mitzvah is the first time you put the tefillin on. Yedei ledaber, a child that knows how to speak. The Torah, the Gemara says, then Aviv loimdei Torah v'krishma. The father learns with him Torah and Krishma. Now, notice this word loimdei. He learns with him Torah and Krishma. The word to teach in Hebrew is melamed, to teach. But what the Gemara is trying to imply is that the father himself, in order for him to teach his son Torah, has to be someone who's a learned himself. You have to be somebody who sets an example by learning Torah yourself, and then you'll be able to teach your own son Torah. You know what they say in the Taich and the Ben Soira Moira of this week's Sedra, ish Ben Soira Moira, if he has a wayward child, is because Einenu Shemeya Bekoil Aviv. He doesn't see his father and mother practicing Torah the way it should be, and therefore he goes off the way into becoming a Ben Saramara. That's a small Chassidish Taich. Anyway, Torah Mahi, what words of Torah are you supposed to teach your child? Amar Rab Hamnuna, you have to make sure he memorizes this pasuk. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Torah for us was commanded by Moshe. In other words, we didn't hear the Torah from Har Sinai except the first two mitzvahs. The rest we had to trust Moshe that this is what Hashem told him. And my Rasha, now that we have the Torah, it's an inheritance. That means it's a inheritance. That means it comes to us quite easier. If we learn Torah and put our minds to it, it comes easier, like an inheritance, like you didn't have to work for it. Kihilas Yaakov, anybody who joins the congregation of Yaakov, even if you're a ger, it becomes, all of a sudden, becomes inheritance. So the Gemara says, Krishma Mahi, how much of Krishma do you have to teach your child? Pasuk Rishon, the first pasuk, he has to know how to accept Ol Malchus Shemaim, the yoke of heaven, to accept that everything that is going on in the world and going on in your life, you have to accept it. It is what it is, and that's Ol Malchus Shemaim, and it's carefully designed by the Eibishter. Hayadeya lishma gufa. If he knows how to watch his body, make sure don't touch, dead shrotzim, dead insects, or things like that make him tameh, or dead bodies. So then oichlan al gufay taharis. Then we trust if he tells us that he's tahar, he didn't touch anybody. Then we could eat on his if his body touched his food item, then we could eat the food item, assuming it's tar, because we trust him that he's not tummy. But we won't trust his hands, because hands, there's an inyan to wash your hands. But if the child advances and he knows that when you move your hands around, your hands become tameh, right? So lishmar yadav, if he knows to wash his hands and to keep his hands clean, so oichlin al yadav taharos, that even if food touches the child's hand, you're allowed to eat. We assume it's tahar. If he tells us that I washed my hands, I'm tahar, my hands are not tameh, my body's not tameh, we trust him. Hayodea lishael. If the child understands what we ask him, if we ask him, did you become tameh? He knows how to say yes or no, or he could say, he's honest to say, I don't know. So then, Bershus hayachid, if he tells us the answer that he's not sure, and this was in a private domain, we ask him, did you become tameh? And he says, I'm not sure. So then sveikoi tameh, we'll go, when we're in doubt, we'll say it's tameh, because that's the halacha. Any suffix, any doubt that arises regarding tumah in a private domain, we rule it as tameh. That's a gzeres hakasiv. Birshus harabim, if it's in a public way, and so it's in a public street, so then sveikoi, when any doubt that arises, tahar would be tahar. That's because we trust the katan. When he tells us, I don't know, so it depends. So then, if it was in a private domain, we'll assume it's tameh. If it's a public domain, and we'll assume that whatever in question is tahar. But if a katan is a baby and we don't trust him, then in all circumstances we will say it's tahar. That's also psakim. So that's a chiddush. That's a chumrah. That once he knows how to ask, then b'rshus yachid sveikei tameh. But if he's somebody you can't trust at all, then it will always be tahar. Hayodea lifrais kapov. If a child is old enough to go duchening, according to Rashi, it means that he's like somewhat a little bit above bar mitzvah. Then cholkin like truma bebeis agronis. A Yisrael is allowed to give him the truma in the storage house in front of everybody. You can give this little kid who's 13 years old truma, because you can't give a little child truma because people will say you're defiling truma because you're giving the little kohen truma. He's going to go home and be metama it. Unless you know for sure that this little child knows tumas and taharas, you're allowed to send him truma to his house and let it eat it. But for him to publicly to give it to him in public in front of everybody, you're not allowed to give truma to a kohen that's under bar mitzvah, unless he's older bar mitzvah that duchins. He has. We know for sure he's bar mitzvah, and then we can trust that he knows how to watch the truma and not make it tameh. We go to Membez Amacheni. Hayadei Lishchait, if you know a carton that knows how to shecht, and he has the skill, the dexterity to shecht, you're allowed to eat from a shechita as long as the gadol stands and watches him. The gadol watches that, makes sure that he doesn't like take a delay in the slaughtering. They're halachas in slaughtering. You're not allowed to delay the slaughter in the middle of the slaughter. You're not allowed to press the knife. So that's the gadol has to do it, but the cotton could shecht, and you could eat. He could be a sheichet. Yochel lechel kazayas dogen. A cotton that could eat. Let's say he's a 1-year-old cotton. He could eat a piece of bread, right? Then, so his marchikim mitzoy osum imei meraglav arba amas. When you're davening, if he has excrement or urine, then you're not allowed to daven in that urine or excrement 4 amas, because that urine is malodorous. And therefore, that excrement is malodorous, so you have to be 8 feet away from it in order to daven Shemoneh Esrei, read Krishma, learn Torah. But if he's a baby, then you don't. Since he didn't eat wheat, since he can't eat wheat, he's just eating soy milk or something. So then his excrement doesn't have a din of normal human soya, human waste, and therefore you don't have to distance yourself for amas. Amar Rav Chizda qualified that the cotton has to be old enough that to eat this kazayas of bread, of dagam, he has to be able to eat a whole olive in about 3 or 4 minutes, which is the kashir of kedei achilas pras. But if he only nibbles on it, then he's not old enough to consider his waste something that you have to distance yourself from. Amar Rav Chia Berei de Rav Yeva, uvegadol, an adult. Let's say you have a gadol, so old, but never he's sick, and he can't eat wheat or whatever. He can't eat wheat. So there, the Mishnah says that no matter what, all excrement that come out from that adult, you have to distance yourself 4 amas before you daven Shemoneh Esrei. The Ksiv, the pasuk says, "V'Yosef das." The more knowledge you have, Yosef mach oiv. That's the more the waste products is more malodorous. That's where we're like turning that pasuk, the way to remember that. The older you are, the more that waste that comes out of you smells. So therefore, that's the pasuk that they're using that to teach you a gadol. There's no exception. A gadol always, the tzeya that comes out of him, and the mei meraglov is something that you have to distance yourself 4 amas from. Yochel lechel kazayas tzoli. If the gadol could eat, if the child could eat kazayas of roasted meat, so then sheichten olav as a pesach, you could shech the carbon pesach for him. Shenamar ish lefi achloi, according to whoever can eat the kazayas. So you can have a group of gedolim shechting the carbon pesach. A cotton that could eat roasted meat has no problem with it. He could be included into the group, but you can't make a group of only ketanim, but he could be included in a group. Rabbi Yehuda said, if you could even, doesn't have to eat until he can, even if he can eat roasted meat, but he has to have the intelligence to know what food is. So Ketzad, how do you determine that? If you would give this 2-year-old a piece of rock, vizarki, you throw it away. Egois, if he takes a walnut, the nightlight, and he will take it. So then he's old enough to be counted as part of the group for carbon pesach, as long as he could eat a roasted piece of meat. But if a child could eat a roasted piece of meat, he's a 1-year-old, he eats a roasted piece of meat, but plays with a rock as with a walnut, so he doesn't know how to determine what's food and what's not. That wouldn't be a child that you could count towards the group of a carbon pesach. Hadron Allah lulav hagazon. Let us begin just for the next 2 minutes the Mishnah, and then we'll wrap it up. Lulav va'arava. There's a mitzvah of lulav, and there's a mitzvah of arava. The mitzvah of lulav, that you carry the lulav and esrog during Sukkot. But Arava, there was a mitzvah to walk around in the Beis Hamikdash with an Arava. The Kahanim would walk around the Mizbeach on Sukkot in the Beis Hamikdash. We have a zecher for that, what we do on Hoshana Rabbah. So the Mishnah says, sometimes Shisha, sometimes you'll do it all 6 days, sometimes Shiva, all 7 days of Sukkot. And we'll explain that in a moment. Halal, the mitzvah of saying halal, v'hasimcha, and mitzvah of eating meat, shmoina. That applies for all 8 days of Sukkot, and that includes Shmini Atzeres, right? So 8 days of Sukkot, you have to say halal every day, and you have to eat meat of a carbon shlamim. Sukkah, to eat in a sukkah, obviously that's 7 days. The Nisach Hamayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach. During the carbon tamid shel shachar, they would pour the water, in addition to pouring wine on the Mizbeach, with a great fanfare, they would pour the water on the Mizbeach. We'll learn a lot about that in the future parak. Shiva, that was all 7 days of Sukkot. Hechalil, playing the flute. In other words, the night before, of every night of Sukkot, they would go down and draw the water, the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, and draw the water for the upcoming morning to pour the water on the Mizbeach. So they would play a flute. And this flute in Simcha, they would play the flute during Chol Hamoed. So sometimes Chamisha, they would do it for 5 days, Vishisha, and sometimes 6 days. Now they played other instruments as well. You know, that's what the nighttime parties are. But the flute had this sound that you could hear out here the other instrument. That's why it's called Hechalil, the flute. So the Mishnah explains, this is the cryptic. Lulav Shiva Ketzad. How is it possible to take the lulav all 7 days? If the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, lulav Shiva. You carry the lulav for 7 days, because again, there was no gezerah not to carry the lulav in shul on Shabbos, especially the first day. Ushar kol yamim. But if the first day of Sukkot comes out on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not on Shabbos, Shisha, then you only carry the lulav and esrog 6 days, because on Shabbos, which would be one of the days of lulav, you would not carry it, because Chachamim said don't carry it on Shabbos, even in the Beis Hamikdash. Even in the Beis Hamikdash, you would not carry it because of the Gezerah Chachamim. And since the first day is more of a universal mitzvah, the Chachamim did not make the Gezerah, but the rest of the days of Sukkot, they made a Gezerah, and therefore you would only have Sukkot of carrying lulav and esrog 7 days, because one of those days will be Shabbos. Arava Shiva Ketzad. What's the case of Arava of 7 days in the Beis Hamikdash? Now, the main day of Arava was on the 7th day. The 7th day, even though this is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, Chazal established that the main big day of Hoshana, which we call Hoshana, of carrying the Arava around the Mizbeach, was the 7th day of Sukkot. So that's the equivalent of lulav being on the first day. So Yom HaShavi Arava Shchol Yesh B'Shabbos, if the 7th day of Hoshana Rabbah falls out on Shabbos, Arava Shiva. Then Arava was every day, including Shabbos, because there was no prohibition from carrying the Arava on Shabbos. Ushar kol hayamim. But if Arava, if the Hoshana Rabbah came out, the 7th day of Sukkot comes out on any other day. The 7th day of Sukkot, let's say, came out on a Tuesday. That means another day came out on Shabbos. During the day that day that came out on Shabbos, let's say Shabbos Chol Hamoed, then we would not carry the Arava in the Beis Hamikdash, because again, the Beis Hamikdash was an outdoor place. So Shisha, they would only do Arava 6 days. Let's finish the Mishnah. It's very simple. Mitzvah lulav Ketzad. What was the mitzvah of lulav that came out on Shabbos? How did it look in the Beis Hamikdash? Listen to this. Yom Tov Rishon Shechag Shechol Yes B'Shabbos. The Yom Tov of the first day of Sukkot that fell out on Shabbos. Ma'lichin es lulveim laHarabayis. Everybody would bring on Erev Shabbos, they would bring their lulav to the mountain, to the temple mountain. V'chazanim, there was special gaboyim, right, sextons, that mekabla mehem, they would take everybody's lulav, without any name tags or anything like that. They would set it up on the bleachers, right? In the bleachers, there was bleachers there in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Ezras Nashim, and therefore that was like the shul in the Beis Hamikdash. V'hazakenim, if you were an older person, they gave you a private locker room where you could put your lulav and esrog. Now, the next day, everybody would come to shul and come to the Beis Hamikdash. Well, you didn't know which one was your lulav and esrog. So you took any lulav and esrog, But you told everybody, you said, the next day they would teach everybody to say, whoever gets my lulav tomorrow in his hand, that's a gift for him. So everybody said, whoever catches my lulav, that's my gift to him. So therefore, everybody was yaitza with a lulav that really totally belonged to him, because obviously a borrowed lulav is not good on the first day. Says the Mishnah, but you would think this would not lead to problems. The next day, mashkimim ruban, everybody would get up and try to get to the base of Mikdash early. The sextons threw the lulav and esrogim before them. Take a lulav, take a lulav, take a lulav. But it got too crowded, and they would try to grab, and by grabbing, they would accidentally hit one to his friend, and it lead to dangerous situation. This would come to a day sakana. It would become it would lead to a sakana. Nobody should bring the lulav and esrog to the harabayis. Get to the mitzvah at home and then come daven in the Beis HaMikdash, but don't bring a lulav and esrog into the Beis HaMikdash because of this, the risk of a stampede. Okay, so ends the daf. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good.
Good night.